Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. As you know, this is going to be Motivation Monday, and what we're going to be doing is trying to give you some motivation for the week and really just talk about a number of different things that might be fitness related. They might not be, since that's kind of my specific niche, but that's not all that I want to talk about or have you guys think of me. So this week, a topic to talk about actually came pretty easily and naturally to me. So I was going on a bike ride this week, and I was actually listening to Dr. Jordan Peterson's podcast. If you haven't listened to him before, I highly recommend it. He's a philosopher and a psychologist. And part of his podcast, he was talking about Harry Potter. And oddly enough, I'd never seen Harry Potter, so when I was listening to this, it was something that I felt kind of biased towards, because I believe that generally, at least for me personally, I'm much less likely to listen to somebody talk about something I don't know if I don't even know the person talking about it. But I've been consuming a pretty good amount of Jordan Peterson's podcast, so I knew that there was most likely some type of underlying context to what he was talking about, so I was kind of willing to hear him out because I'd resonated with so much of what he talked about in the past before. And I know that for me, I've always liked his ability to bridge two topics together, so I was curious to see where he was going with this. So he was actually talking about Harry Potter and just how great it is at teaching you life lessons and that type of stuff, just kind of how symbolic the characters are within it. And I can't speak too much on that because, again, I've never seen the full franchise itself or all the movies, but from what I know and from what I have seen of Harry Potter the little bit, it definitely does seem like something that when you have strong fictional characters, generally they represent something and they all kind of conflict in a way that generally is representative of something larger. But the reason I'm telling you this story is actually not necessarily just because of that part of the podcast. It was more so because of what he said at one part of it. He said and stated that when he talks about things like Harry Potter being good teachers of life, or he'll preach things like you can learn a lot from Pinocchio, you can learn a lot from all these types of shows and this type of stuff. What he said was, generally when he starts to preach or talk about things like this, where you can learn a lot from watching a movie, for example, or watching a series, or reading this certain book, he says that a lot of the time people generally think they're above whatever that topic is. So he said with Harry Potter in particular, a lot of people deemed it as something that you really can't learn from and they're above. But then he went on to talk about the statistical success of Harry Potter and how it's one of the most successful movie franchises of all time. And he kind of left it as, well, you can ignore that, or you can take that fact and kind of realize that this must resonate with a lot of people and they must feel some type of connection to it for them to literally give money to see it and to buy its products, because generally, you won't invest in something that's going to make your life worse, if you have any sense. And I started thinking on that bike ride, okay, so this makes sense. I want to be open-minded to this concept. So who are my role models, and are any of them fictional? And I kind of drew a parallel instantly with this because I think these two things generally are grouped into a similar category. So I wasn't super into Harry Potter as a kid. I actually really liked Star Wars as a kid. It was something that, when I was younger, I watched a lot of. I thought it was cool, and I really just was a Star Wars kid. Like, it's just something that I enjoyed. But you know how this goes. As I grew up, it was something that wasn't cool at a certain point, so naturally you just stop talking about the things that you enjoyed as a child like that, because once you're entering generally like a middle school age, those types of things, you don't want to feel like a kid anymore. If anything, at that point you're trying to mimic an adult and grow up fast, and I think generally the hierarchy of middle school and that type of stuff is dominated by kids who are willing and trying to kind of bridge that gap between being a younger child and a young adult, because I think that's generally that transitional period that we're working towards in that stage of our lives. So I really decided and committed to talk about this topic on this week of Motivation Monday when I kind of drew one of the coincidences from my experiences recently and paired that with kind of what I've been talking about in terms of this podcast and the story. So I have a couple t-shirts that are graphic t-shirts, Star Wars t-shirts, and recently I've been wearing them just to casual places, like I'm going grocery shopping, getting food, just places like that, things that really wouldn't require you to get dressed up for. And oddly enough, what I found most of the time when I wear one of those shirts, somebody out in public that I don't know will give me a compliment or start up a conversation with me about my shirt. And I know that's a very small thing, but I think that a lot of people, most likely men specifically, can relate to getting a small compliment. Honestly, like, we tend to notice those things and it feels good, because I don't believe that compliments are generally as plentiful or common for men as they can be for women. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I also think that just generally speaking, most dudes can relate to the fact that they know or can remember several compliments that they've gotten. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think a lot of men can remember a lot of the compliments they've gotten because it's easier to remember a few when you don't get many than many and then have to sort through them. And that's just one of the things I think that are limited, generally speaking, in that kind of respect too. So moving on, I remember a couple weeks ago I was wearing a Star Wars shirt in Chipotle actually, and this kid around my age came up to me and was like, dude, I like your shirt, started talking to me about the show, the Star Wars show, started naming the characters, and before you know it, we were like two 9-year-olds in the middle of Chipotle, just strangers meeting, talking about my shirt. And it was something that was kind of cool because I went to reflect on that, and that was kind of one of the more intense images. You know, someone didn't just say I like your shirt, but we actually had a conversation about it that was reasonably in depth. And so I started thinking, why does this happen to me? And I kind of concluded and think that, so I'm 20 years old, and I think that right now a lot of the people my age are being thrown into responsibility that makes us feel grown up. And I think that generally everybody, but I can only speak on being a man obviously, I think that generally the older you get and the more responsibility you get, the more you kind of miss being a child without that responsibility, because you realize a number of things. You know, you were a little bit ignorant to death and things that can happen over your life. You were a little bit less cautious at times, just because as children it's just promoted to play and have a good time and do those things and not really spend your time stressing about too much. But the older you get, naturally and rightfully, you get more responsibility, and as a result you kind of just think about what you used to be like and what life used to be like. And that's something that, again, I think is very relatable to kids my age right now. So I think that's why we're all kind of jumping at the ability to talk about something that we all enjoyed as children, because it reminds us of those times and kind of puts us in some form of tribe where, you know, for example, people who watch Star Wars, I know that sounds weird to say, but we can all talk about these things and relate to them, and it's just kind of an easy way to have a conversation that makes you feel fulfilled without really realizing that's what you're doing. So the first role model that I'm going to share about and talk about is actually going to be a character from Star Wars. And again, I watched it when I was younger, so I think my ability to absorb and enjoy a lot of this type of stuff was enhanced by the fact that I was younger and impressionable, because generally I think when we watch things when we're younger we perceive them differently than I would now. And I know that for a fact. Even if I were to watch a lot of the older Star Wars movies now, I would think the effects and stuff are kind of old and outdated because my imagination isn't as great as it was when I was a kid. So now I'm a little bit more analytical than I would have been back then about things like the effects. But the character I'm going to talk about is Anakin Skywalker, and if you've seen Star Wars, you know that that's kind of the main character throughout most of the movies and most of the shows. And it wasn't until I got older that I started to realize that I actually enjoyed the plot of it a lot more, because I started to understand a lot of the things, because I think I could subconsciously draw parallels between the Star Wars universe and our universe. And oh my god, I can't believe I'm talking about this again, but it's something that I just felt so compelled to speak about for reasons that I'll talk about later. But the character of Anakin Skywalker is somebody who was always pretty easy to draw motivation from, because really what you're doing when you're watching Star Wars is you're watching a character that's so driven by good intentions and has nothing but a pure heart in the beginning become the main villain through tragedy and manipulation. So watching this superhero like character struggle in his world and not understand why he has to struggle was something that I think, again, is always just so comforting to see, because especially for young men in particular, watching this very strong masculine figure go through challenges is comforting in a way. One of the messages I got out of there is not only are you supposed to struggle, but it actually has the ability to make you stronger in some sense too. And one of, I think, the most relatable things that I got from Star Wars specifically is that the main character's specific group is fighting for good, and they're not allowed to become attached to things. Attachment is forbidden. But the main character ended up falling in love and kind of ignoring one of the most important rules that he's supposed to be bound to, and as a result, his blind love is what caused him to be self-destructive in the end and kind of turn evil. And I think that this resonates with me a lot, because it's something that I think a lot of younger guys go through in terms of being afraid of that fear of attachment for many different reasons, whether it's going to throw you off from your main goal, or kind of just, again, once you let somebody in, it can feel self-destructive in terms of putting all your eggs in somebody else's basket, so to speak. Then they're in control, and if they're not there, then you're not really sure what to do. And I know for a fact that there's probably a lot of people who've had similar thoughts about Star Wars in terms of this, or just any other show. I'm only using this because this is what I know, but really the point I'm getting at is I know I draw motivation from this, and it's a story that I understand and like and enjoy and always have, but the fear of talking about it is something that I don't want to encourage, because I think that if we can begin to understand our motivations and the way we work, we can actually have some really good conversations and also work on the ability to self-motivate. So I think that the overall story of Star Wars is something that is really easy to draw comparisons to, because there's a lot of characters represent things that are symbolic in a way that are really easy to kind of digest, but also realize in your life, for example, there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad. You know, that's one of the main topics of Star Wars specifically. And trust me, this seemed like a weird thing for me to talk about initially too. It was something that I was debating if I was going to do for a while or not, but I felt like I was doing a disservice to you guys if I let my own fear stand in the way of potentially giving you a tool to realize that you need to have the ability to self-motivate. I believe that the ability to self-motivate is something that's so important that it is worth spending our entire lives trying to improve and understand.